Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman of the Football History Dude podcast, and I'm stopping by this show real quick to tell you about a couple of cool giveaways that we have going on here at the network. Both are autographed books covering various topics of the NFL. The first is The Point After, How One Resilient Kicker Learned There Is More to Life Than the NFL by ex-NFL kicker Sean Conley. It goes over his unique experience as a walk-on kicker at the University of Pitt after never playing high school football. And then it gets into some of his time playing for NFL teams and so much more beyond the gridiron. The other is from author Kevin Bryant. His book is titled Spies on the Sidelines, The High-Stakes World of NFL Espionage. This book started as a curiosity, kind of a passion project to understand everything revolving around, well, Spygate. But this put Kevin down a rabbit hole learning about all sorts of espionage that has occurred throughout the history of the NFL. Both permissible and often the illicit techniques of gathering intel to try to impact the outcome of the game. To sign up for your chance to win an autographed copy of one of these books, all you gotta do is head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways and sign up. That's sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways. Again, check out all the other podcasts that we have in the Sports History Network as well. But now, back to your regularly scheduled journey to the sports history timeline.
A stick measurement has been called. It's the stick of Marty McSorley.
Welcome to Marty's Illegal Stick, a hockey history podcast with your host, Scott Kinville. Let's hop on that Zamboni time machine and go back in time to look at hockey's glorious history.
And what's up, hockey fans, and welcome to episode number 87 of Marty's Illegal Stick, a hockey history podcast, recording here on Wednesday, July 27th, 2022. We have got a very exciting show lined up for you today. This is I always love to talk about the old-time hockey, and we're going to go back over 100 years to talk about our topic today, and this is just going to be great. Before I bring our guest in, though, I want to bring in my co-host, my compadre, my sidekick, if you will, Mr. Dave the Save Warner. How are you?
How you doing? Good. Since you had a birthday yesterday, it's you can still remember 100 years back, right? The
sort
history?
of. Get in there.
Yeah.
We're getting there. And it was 2 days ago. So.
Oh, 2 days ago. All right. The days all blend together for me.
Listen, I don't count birthdays anymore. I stopped counting them. That's it.
I know. Then that's telling.
I can't even give them to my daughter anymore, so I had to give them to her rabbits.
Oh, okay.
That's
all right.
Yeah. So, yeah, like you said, talking about old-time hockey today, which is, like I said, one of my favorite topics. And a while back, we did a little segment called the Zamboni Time Machine. It was part of the, I think it was episode 40 when we did this particular one. It was about a epic journey of the Dawson City Nuggets in 1905. They traveled all the way from Dawson City in the Klondike, the Yukon, all the way to Ottawa to play for the Stanley Cup.
I remember that episode.
Remember that?
I do.
It was an absolutely incredible journey, and nothing like you would think of by today's standards anyways. Anyways, that story was inspired by a book that I had read called Klondikers, Dawson City Stanley Cup Challenge and How a Nation Fell in Love with Hockey. And I am so excited to announce that today we had the author of that book with us, Mr. Tim Falconer. Tim, how are you?
I'm great, Scott. How are you?
Doing fantastic. I'm so glad you're here because, like I said, this is just such a fascinating story. And just on the surface of it alone, the story itself for the trip is great. But the backstory behind it is just as fascinating. So obviously, you did a lot of research going into this book. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how your research came about.
Well, I've been a writer my whole career and started out in magazines and then did a bunch of books. And after I finished one called Bad Singer about the science of music, my editor said, "What's next?" I said, "I have no idea." And she said, "Well, it should be something you're passionate about because, you're passionate about music." And that's why she liked Bad Singer. So I said, "Well, I'm passionate about hockey in the Yukon." And I mentioned the Dawson City Challenge. And she said, "Oh, that sounds good." And I didn't think it was a very good idea. And then about 8 months later, I emailed her and said, "Do you still think it's a good idea?" So then I started, doing research. She said, "Well, see if there's enough research to make it work." And I got to the point where I had too much to give up, but not enough to keep going. I had enough for maybe half a book, a third of a book. They're just, I naively thought that there would be letters and the diaries of the players and whatnot. Of course, if there had been, someone else would have written this book. And then I read about in 1896 when they started to do play-by-play of games by telegram.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I read that, I was like, I know how to do this book. So I really tell the story of the early days of hockey and how Canada fell in love with hockey, because I know most of your listeners are American, but in Canada, it is about a dozen years from when Stanley donated the cup to, I mean, I could have said shorter than 12 years, but I think the Dawson Challenge really showed how crazy the country was for hockey, that even, I give away the ending, they get blown out by Ottawa. The battle on the ice, it didn't hurt the game. Like, the game just got more and more popular, and to me, it just sort of said, okay, when this series happened, it's like, yeah, Canada loves hockey.
Oh, absolutely. And in reading the book, and like I'm telling you, I've said it before, and I know I'm kind of gushing here, but this is just a fantastic book. If you are a fan of how early history, any sport really, but especially with this one, with hockey, this is the book to read, because it's funny. The sport of hockey in Canada actually ran parallel with the development of baseball in the States. Because in reading the book, and I don't want to give too much away out of the book, because obviously we want people to buy it, which, by the way, here's what the cover looks like. And you can find this book everywhere. Amazon, Barnes & Noble. We'll talk about that later on, too. But anyways, it started off as basically an amateur club sport, which is exactly how baseball started here in the States. And prior to, I think it was 1926, they really were trying to keep the professional element out of the game. And so Lord Stanley, who was the Governor General of Canada in 1893, correct?
Yeah.
And the Governor General is basically the equivalent of what would be the Prime Minister in Canada today, President in the... No? Okay.
The Governor General is the Queen's representative.
Okay.
So, bizarrely, the Queen of England is also the Queen of Canada.
Right.
But obviously she doesn't spend much time in Canada. So there's a Governor General. So
okay.
It's an honorary title. It's not elected like the Prime Minister.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So there isn't really an equivalent in the States. But yeah, he was British, and he really believed in amateurism, and he wanted to support that. And I mean, he totally fell in love with hockey. I mean, he first time he saw it in 1889, just fell in love with the sport, and his sons played, and so yeah, he wanted to support the game. And once he did, in Canada was such a monarchy obsessed country, it was sort of like the good housekeeping seal of approval. And
sure.
Sort of like, well, the Governor General says we should love this game, so we do.
Stamp, here you go. Yeah, because I mean, that was when hockey was first developing. That started basically in Ontario and Montreal, correct? Where the main amateur teams were out of Montreal.
Montreal was it was Montreal, Ottawa, and Quebec City,
mm-hmm.
and Toronto really only started about 1890.
Right.
So Toronto was a little late. I mean, Montreal and Ottawa have advanced. They're a little bit further north, so the seasons where you can get natural ice. And there wasn't artificial ice in Canada for a long time. There wasn't a couple places in the States. And so Toronto had that disadvantage, but they also were even more obsessed with amateurism than the rest of the country. So Montreal was really important in the development of hockey. Yeah. And then Winnipeg became really important. Toronto never won the cup until 1914.
Really? That long, huh? Wow, I didn't realize it was that long. Yeah. And now it's like the hockey headquarters of the world. But
Toronto hasn't won the cup since 1966.
Well, but speaking of those old rinks, I mean, I think it's interesting to know. You said there was no artificial ice. That wasn't even invented yet. So a lot of those old rinks were open air rinks.
They were all natural ice. There was an artificial rink in Pittsburgh, and I think then in upper Michigan, when they built that. We can talk about the leagues in the States, but so I mean, lots of the games, particularly if they were played in March, there was like an inch of water on the ice because it was just so mild.
Well, you needed an oar instead of a stick, huh?
Yes. I mean, some of the newspaper coverage of some of those games, saying, well, there's a rumor that there was some ice underneath all that water, but
because you're right. In those early days too, there wasn't a lot of like standardized as far as the rules, size of the rinks, or anything like that. Some of them had square corners, if I'm not mistaken, from what I was reading.
Square corner. And in terms of not standardized rules, there were no standardized penalties. So the referees at the beginning could send you away for 30 seconds or 3 minutes or the whole game, whatever he wanted. So it was not like, okay, there's 2 or 5, that's it, and the size of the rinks was different from place to place. Although the Victoria rink had pretty close to what's normal now, and then the Montreal Arena, when it was built in 1899, that set the standard that the NHL still uses today at 200 by 85.
Okay. And you mentioned the referees, because in those early days, that was really a big deal as to who the referees were going to be for these games, because both teams had to agree on them, if I read that correctly.
Yeah, it was often a player. It wasn't like someone who specialized in refereeing usually. It was usually a player from another team. And so in Montreal, it was not too big a problem to get somebody they could all agree on. But when Winnipeg and Montreal would play, it was like, well, Winnipeg didn't want a Montreal ref, and Montreal didn't want a Winnipeg ref. So sometimes they would get an Ottawa ref. But it was also kind of a dangerous job to be ref, because they would throw stuff at you, including a lot of empty flasks.
I like that.
They were empty.
Well, there's that.
And this is before helmets. So.
This is before helmets, yeah.
You mentioned Winnipeg, and actually Winnipeg played a pretty important role in the growth of the game in Canada, because at the time when Lord Stanley donated the cup, and for a few years after that, well, like we had said, it was basically had just stayed in Montreal, Ottawa, Quebec City, and there was teams from those 3 cities kind of battling it out. Winnipeg comes along, and I think it was 1903, not quite then, but
1896.
Thank you. And they challenged for the cup, and they would eventually win it. Now, explain the process of how a team went through to challenge for the cup, because it's nothing like it is nowadays.
Right. So Stanley donated it as a challenge cup. In fact, nowhere on the cup does it say the Stanley Cup. It says the Dominion Hockey Challenge Cup.
Okay.
And P.D. Ross, the newspaper publisher and hockey player who became one of the 2 trustees, his first rule when he sat down to write the rules, before he'd even seen the cup, was it'll be called the Stanley Cup. So what a team. So in the original rules, it was teams from Ontario and Quebec. But he left it open if somewhere else in Canada developed good hockey that they could challenge. Well, 3 years later, Winnipeg challenged, and they came to Montreal Valentine's Day. So it was the Winnipeg Victorias. They challenged the Montreal Victoria, the current Cup champions, and they played in the Victoria rink. So that shows you how much Canada liked Queen Victoria.
Jeez.
So Winnipeg stuns Montreal, wins the cup. They take it back to Winnipeg. They hold the first Stanley Cup parade there. They fill the cup with champagne and drink from it. It's probably the first time anyone had done that. Now, it was just the top, the punch bowl. All the other stuff has been added. And Montreal doesn't like this. So they challenged Winnipeg. And they go back the end of December of 1896. So the game in Montreal on Valentine's Day, the telegraph companies set up bulletins, basically major events like scoring and when there was a goal or an injury stoppage or whatever. But for the game in December, they set it up. They had a knowledgeable hockey person who sat beside the telegraph operator in the rink, and they did play-by-play. And this became a normal thing. It had been done in other sports. It had been done in boxing. It might have been done in baseball. I'm not sure. But this became a thing. And for people in two different cities and two different provinces to be able to experience the sport at the same time was really quite remarkable. This is 130 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so people would get together in hotel lobbies or outside telegraph offices or outside newspaper offices, and someone would read each telegram. So-and-so gets the puck, so-and-so takes the puck down there, so-and-so shoots. And then often the newspapers would reprint all the telegrams the next day. So if you hadn't seen the game, you could get a pretty good sense of how it went.
The first box scores. That's really interesting because, like I say, we keep drawing parallels here to what was going on in the States with baseball, and that's what they were doing during the World Series at that time too. People would gather, especially in the big cities, they would gather at saloons, hotels, or whatever, and each play would come over the wire and it would be read out, just like you described. So was there anything going on as far as organized hockey in the States at this time?
Yes. So there was the Western Pennsylvania Hockey League, which was based in Pittsburgh, where there was a rink. I may be saying this wrong. Duquesne Gardens, or Duquesne Garden, and it had artificial ice, I believe. So they had 4 teams that played, and so they played out of there. And before that, ice polo had been really popular in Pittsburgh, which is a bit surprising. But hockey took off, and then really important development of hockey, and it was going on in other states, New England and New York as well, but upper peninsula of Michigan. So a guy from Ontario named Jack Gibson, who had been suspended from the OHA because his team was suspended they were suspending teams all the time, but somebody took money or someone did something, and he decided to go down to Detroit to study dentistry. And then he had gone, and while at college, he had gone up to play some games in the Upper Peninsula where there was a big mining boom going on at the time. And he decided to set up his dentistry practice there. And he had sort of given, he was devoted to his dentistry, and he gave up playing hockey. And he was a big guy, good, fast player, really good player. But I guess in his waiting room, he had kept a scrapbook. And there were all these articles about what a great hockey player he was and stuff. And some young reporter from the local newspaper saw that and said, "Oh, can I interview you?" So once the interview appeared, all of a sudden there was this great interest in starting a hockey team and a hockey league. So there was a bunch of teams in Upper Portage Lakes, Houghton, I think it's called, and Calumet, and a bunch of teams started, and then they started the International Hockey League. It was going to be called something else, and then So there was a team in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and also a team in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. So once the team in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario started, they called it the International Hockey League, and it was professional.
Oh, okay.
And it was so. Meanwhile, in Canada, the hockey bosses are really fighting professionalism. So all these Canadian players are going down to get lots of money to play in Michigan, and that was sort of like the days were numbered for amateurism anyway. But that league really put an end to it because the fans didn't like that. Their local boys were leaving to go play hockey in the States for money, and they just wanted to see the best hockey.
Sure,
right?
absolutely, right?
I mean, the arguments of in favor of amateurism was like a bunch of elitists arguing about this. The average working guy didn't care; he just wanted to see good hockey and his team to win.
Sure.
So then what they did in Canada, they said, okay, well, we'll allow professionalism, but teams had to declare who was professional and who wasn't. And then eventually, everyone became professional.
Yeah, because who's going to play for free when the guy next to him is getting paid whatever, right? So that can tend to put a little damper on things, I guess. But so this is all obviously in the first part of the 20th century, and Michigan, of course, it wasn't really the frontier, but the West was still in the final stages of being settled, shall we say. And in the meantime, there's this little thing called the Klondike Gold Rush, because gold was found in the Klondike, which obviously there was a lot of people that were looking to get rich and started migrating that way. What year was that, the gold strike? Do you recall? Or
well, the actual strike was 1896.
Okay.
But it sort of took a long time for the news to get out. So in 1897, 2 ships left the Yukon with a lot of guys who had made a lot of money. So a lot of guys with gold. One went to San Francisco, one went to Portland, or one went to Seattle. Anyway, two to West Coast cities. And I think, it's one thing to read in the paper, like, oh, there's a gold rush, but there's another when you see people with gold. And this just started, it was just insane. Like, there's one story about a guy who was driving a tram, and he just stopped, walked off the job, and went up to the it's too long to get there.
Y'all can walk home.
Real rush was 1898, 2 years after so the summer of 1898 was what we talk about as the Klondike Gold Rush, because that's how long it took everyone to get there. They had left a year earlier, and they had to take a boat up to Alaska. Well, there were other routes, but the one most people took was to take a boat up to Alaska and then climb either the Chilkoot or the White Pass, then build a boat and go down the Yukon River to Dawson.
Yeah, because there was really no easy way to get there.
There was no easy way to get there.
Build a boat.
Like, even there was the so-called rich man's route, which went all the way up the coast and around Alaska, and then came up the Yukon River. But all the people who left on that didn't leave in time to make it up the river before freeze up. So only a handful of people who went that route made it in 1897 because, and they had to walk or find another way from once the ships got iced in.
Yeah, because much different from the California Gold Rush, where you didn't have that kind of weather to deal with. If you didn't get out of there in time up in the Yukon, like you just said, when freeze up hits, you're done for the winter. That's it. You're not going anywhere.
Well, Jack London, who everyone knows, his books about the Yukon. He got about halfway down the Yukon River to Dawson, and then spent the winter near the Stewart River in a cabin, and then in the spring made it all the way to Dawson, and didn't spend that long in Dawson, but spent long enough to get a lot of good stories to write some great books.
I guess so. He did, too. That's for sure. You know, we're going to put a map up from the book Klondikers here because I want just to kind of give a perspective as to where we're talking about. And I know it's kind of hard to see, but if you
especially if you're on a podcast.
Yeah, right. Well, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. If not, I'll describe it for you. Where Alaska is, if you draw basically a line through the middle of Alaska heading back towards Canada, that's approximately where the Yukon is. And we're the subject of our next story here, Dawson. Well, it's Dawson City, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Dawson City is, and there's also Whitehorse there. So 1904 comes around. Dawson City is starting to boom because of the gold, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, no. See, by 1904, it's getting smaller.
Okay.
So 1898, it's about 30,000 people. And by 1899, they're starting to leave. They've gone on. There are other gold rushers, one in Nome, Alaska, and also most of the people who made there in 1890, like everything, all the claims were staked. Most people who went there didn't find any gold. If they did, they found only a little, or if they found a lot, they spent their money gambling and drinking. Very few people made their fortune there. But anyway, so the population was declining. And by 1904, by 1901, it was below 10,000. And it was continuing to drop to 1904.
Okay. So I guess I should have reworded that. It would more or less, it wasn't like the Wild West anymore. It had kind of become more calmed down.
There was one wild summer. Right. And then it became very, shall I say, civilized. But, in 1902, they built an athletic center with the only indoor rink west of Winnipeg. They had electric power in the late 1890s because of the mines. So even though it was a town on the, at the end of the road, well, there were no roads, like at the far corners of the earth, they had all the amenities, or most of the amenities of a southern city. I should, it's really close to Alaska, and a lot of Americans considered it part of the States. And in fact, the population of Dawson was majority, well more than half of the population was American.
Okay, yeah, because there was American companies doing business there too, as well.
Oh yeah, and as I say, most of the people who, they came from all over the world and they came from all over North America, but the majority of the people came from the West Coast, which was, a little easier. I guess if you were from, upstate New York, you could take the train across and then go up. But the population was largely American.
Okay. Okay. So
all the hockey players were Canadian.
Yes, there you go.
on the team that challenged for the cup.
So with the relatively quick growth then, and then obviously, like you said, the population declined, but everything seemed to be starting to fall into place for Dawson City. How did they go about issuing a challenge for the Stanley Cup? Because up until that point, it was largely a Midwestern to an Eastern kind of thing. So how does Dawson City make the challenge, and how does it get accepted?
Well, interesting. So a guy named Weldy Young, who was a star for Ottawa and was at the banquet for the Ottawa Hockey Club. He was 20 at the time and already a veteran. He started when he was 17 playing for them. He was at the banquet at the end of 1892 when the team has gone undefeated, where Lord Stanley's aide-de-camp read a letter saying, "I want to donate a trophy." So he was there at the beginning of the trophy, and he always wanted to win it. But he goes to Dawson City in 1899, and as early as 1900, he wrote a letter home saying that Dawson was going to challenge for the cup. In 1901, they officially did challenge for the cup, but then nothing ever came of it. Winnipeg was cup champions at the time, and the trustees said, send us some dates. And then, I don't know, maybe it got lost in the mail. I don't know what happened. Nothing happened. Then in 1904, they issued a challenge. Now, there was a 4-team league in Dawson. mean, there was lots of other hockey. I mean, there was women's hockey, and there were like the doctors would play the lawyers. They were so-called fat man's game where every player was over 215 pounds. But in 1904, the senior league said, we're going to do an all-star team. And Ottawa's the holder and the trustees, they agreed to this. Now, I'm not sure why, because everyone must have known that they weren't really in the same league, literally and figuratively, as Ottawa. I think there was a lot of PR challenges. The game was growing really quickly, but there was the fight over professionalism, and all the players moving to the States to play for money in Upper Michigan, and all the violence in the sport. Violence is a controversial part of hockey from the very, very beginning. And so I think the trustees said, okay, we should do this as a PR move. Like, it'll sell out the rink for sure. It'll be really popular. And the fact that Weldy Young was on the team may have had a factor, because he was really popular in Ottawa. So it was probably not the right thing to do, but they approved the challenge.
Okay. And at that time, too, if you challenged for the Stanley Cup, you had to go to the champion city. There was no such thing as like what we have nowadays where, 2 games at home, 2 games on the road. There was none of that.
No.
I couldn't imagine this road trip going back and forth. That's for sure.
Well, that was one of the big concerns, that if Dawson won, they'd take the cup back to the Yukon, and then everyone said it's not worth it to go there to challenge for it.
Yeah.
They would come up with a trophy.
That makes sense too. That really does. But fortunately, for this story's sake, they did accept the challenge, and everything was all set to go. I believe the games were scheduled for January of 1905. Yep. But because of the distance involved, they had to leave Dawson in December of 1904.
That's right. They had quite a journey. So they thought it would take them 18 days. The first part, now you hear a lot of stories that they took dog sleds. This isn't true. Half of them left on foot on the 18th of December. 3 of them left on foot on the 18th. 4 of them left on bikes the next day.
Now, when you say bikes, so you're talking bicycles.
Bicycles, yep.
Imagine.
And they had to go 330 miles to Whitehorse along it was called the Overland Trail, but it was, well, let's put it this way, no car made it down there until 1912.
Wow.
This was for horse carriages and sleighs. So all the bikes broke down, but they made it to Whitehorse in 9 days. So that was good. By this point, there was a narrow gauge train that ran from Whitehorse to Skagway, Alaska, which was only, 110 miles or something. But there was a massive snowstorm, and there were snow slides that stopped the train. So they were stuck in Whitehorse. They wired the captain of the ship they were supposed to take and said, wait for us. It waited 24 hours and then took off 2 hours before their train arrived in Skagway. So then they're stuck in Skagway, Alaska. There's a rink there, but it's half sand, half ice. Dulled their skates, so that was no good. They did dive in the Skagway River every morning, which would have been really cold.
Ooh, jeez.
Speaking of which, during December up in the Yukon, what's the average temperature about? Any idea?
Average temperature, I think, was like minus 22. Oof. But it often was down to minus 40 or below that.
Oh, right? And they're doing this on foot.
And
they're
doing this on foot.
Oh, man.
And at night, they're sleeping at roadhouses. There's at least one night they stayed in a tent with a bunch of miners, and it was so cold they just sat up because they couldn't sleep.
Gosh.
So anyway, they're in Skagway, and they're supposed to be in training, right? Like they have to be fit to take on Ottawa. But the local athletics, the Elks and the athletic club, are very good hosts in Skagway. So the rumor was they were in serious liver training in Skagway. And then on New Year's Eve, they finally get on a ship. But instead of going to Vancouver as their original ship was supposed to, this is an American ship, so it goes to Seattle. And then they take a tram to Vancouver and then a train across. So they had hoped to arrive a week before the first game. They arrived 48 hours before the first game. And you can imagine not having been on ice for 3.5 weeks, and they're not in great shape.
Oh, they had to have been absolutely exhausted.
One of the players said, like in his dreams when he was sleeping, he was still dreaming of walking through the snow.
My goodness.
So they have a couple of practices, and they play their first game. They're very optimistic. Now, their best player, Weldy Young, has not made it on the journey because of his job. He couldn't get away. He said, "You guys go ahead. I'll catch up." He doesn't catch up in time for the first game. They lose 9-2, and but the first 20 minutes, Dawson looked pretty good, and then Ottawa started to skate away from them. Now, Ottawa was a great team, but they also had the best player in hockey's first superstar, one-eyed Frank McGee, and he had scored one goal in the game. At the bar afterwards, someone overheard it was probably the manager of the Dawson team, Joe Boyle, who's quite a character in himself. But apparently he said, well, this McGee's not such a big deal. He's not such a great scorer. So this got back to McGee. And the next game, he scored 14 goals. 23-2. He scored 8 goals in a row.
Jeez.
The original locker board material.
What was the final score on that one? What did you say? I missed it.
23-2.
23-2. Jeez.
And he scored 14 goals.
So let me ask you, Tim, one-eyed Frank McGee, did he get his nickname for obvious reasons?
He had twice playing hockey injured his eye. He had 2 eyes. He wasn't completely blind, but he had impaired vision. I don't know. It's unclear how much vision he had in his bad eye. He did make it into the army. He got killed in the First World War in France. And there's stories about how he tricked the doctor who was testing his eye with I don't. Anyway, he somehow
they were taking anybody. Come on.
But he definitely had a damaged eye, which is why he was called One-Eyed Frank McGee. And in fact, he should have started playing for Ottawa when he was 18. He didn't start till he was about 21 because of this eye thing.
Okay.
Barry is dissing on me here. He wanted to know if I was in goal for those 23 scored points.
Were you?
I tell you what, there would have been 23 if I was in goal.
You know what? I got to say that. So the goalie on the Dawson team was a guy who had only played goal a couple times before that. He was a really good skater. He'd won all sorts of speed skating championships in the Yukon, and he was a really good hockey player. But the only position available was goal, because the regular goalie, the best goalie in the league, was the gold commissioner. So he couldn't leave for a few months. So this 18-year-old kid, he turned 19 just before the series, but he was 18 when he was picked.
You know what I find amazing is that Weldy actually caught up.
Player on the ice for Dawson. Like all the papers said, if it hadn't been for him, it would have been worse.
Oh, geez.
Well, the funniest part is that Weldy caught up to him for the second game, you said, and it was even worse than the first game.
No, Weldy caught up for the tour afterwards.
Oh, I thought you meant he caught up for game 2.
No.
Okay.
So after the series, they did a tour of the Maritimes and then Quebec, Ottawa. They went down to Pittsburgh, and Weldy joined them for that. Although halfway through, he bailed out and decided he wasn't going back to Yukon and stayed in Ottawa. But on the tour, they did pretty well. They won 10 and lost 12. So they were, competitive with most good teams. But, it's sort of like, playing in the Colorado Avalanche. Like they're the best team, and they also have Cale Makar. And,
sure.
They have the superstar and they have the great supporting cast. That was Ottawa. I mean, even without One-Eyed Frank McGee, they were a great team.
Well, at that point, they were known as the Ottawa Silver Seven, correct?
Okay, so
I thought
Dawson team. People talk about them as the Nuggets. They weren't known as the Nuggets then. That came later. I don't know where that came from. They talk about the Ottawa Silver Seven. The newspapers didn't call them that at the time. This was later on. I know where that story came from. So the manager of the team owned a drugstore in Ottawa, but he also owned shares in some silver mines in Cobalt, Ontario. There had been a big silver boom in 1903. And so he gave each of the players silver nuggets. And when he was doing that, one of the players turned to another and said, we should call ourselves the Silver Seven. But at the time, there were maybe 2 or 3 references to the Silver Seven in newspapers. Mm-hmm. This came later. So that was one of the things about this book was I found out the names of the teams that we all think they were called wrong. People thought they took dog sleds. They didn't, although I figured out for the longest time, I couldn't figure out, well, where did this come from? And then I read an article that said that miners referred to a long walk as a mush. And so they had must, i.e. a long walk from Dawson to Whitehorse. And I think people in Nice said, oh, mush, that means they took dog sleds. And
Gotcha.
That's how that confusion got started.
Well, see, with the Ottawa Silver Sun, what I was kind of driving at was at that time, in that particular era, the game was a lot different itself because there were more players on the ice.
There were 7 players, yes.
Right.
The game has changed a lot since it. Although, someone once asked me, well, would you recognize it? Well, yeah, you'd recognize it as hockey. It was different. There were 7 players. So there were the free forwards, then there was the rover, and then there was the 2 defensemen lined up one in front of the other. There was the point, who in the very beginning was like a second goaltender, and then the cover point, who became more of a rushing defenseman over time. And I know Scott, I know you're a big fan of old rinks, so I'll tell you a bit about the original rinks. So they didn't have boards. So like the Victoria rink in Montreal had a foot high, it's basically a board, and then there was the standing room area.
Wow. Oh. So it was more or less a railing.
That'd be rough on your legs.
And there was no railing. So what would happen is if it was really crowded, people would get sort of pushed out onto the ice. And so there was one game where the ref had to stop the game so that the people who had been pushed on the ice could, fight their way back into the crowd. We talked about the natural ice, so there were a lot of slush often. Unless, you had a cold spell, then the ice was great. Mm-hmm. The rinks were really, really smoky. Like everybody was smoking. And so there was like this cloud of smoke hanging over everything. They were dark, and there was lighting, but it was dingy.
Right.
And so for the fans, it was a bit of a different experience. Now, when the Montreal Arena gets built in 1899, that's the first venue that's designed for hockey. Like all the other rinks were designed for skating. They were skating rinks. And so the Montreal Arena, even the name was important because all the other rinks had been called rinks. And it was built with the paying customer in mind. And it had 4,000 seats and standing room area. And you could rent a blanket for 10 cents, and there were refreshment areas. So like all of a sudden by 1899, they're starting to say, we could make some money off this. And they did.
And that was the end of,
Well, hey, much like today, that's what it's all about for sports. Make that money, right? Because you said in the book too that there was no forward passing to prevent offsides, which had to make the game tremendously different. I mean, if you really think about that. Yeah.
So initially it was a lot of individual efforts, let's call it. So it wasn't, there wasn't a lot of passing because you couldn't pass forward. And so they just didn't pass that much. And initially the defensemen were both stay-at-home defensemen. So then they started to develop what they call combination plays, or what we would call passing. Mm-hmm. And they would go down the ice 3 or 4 abreast. So the 3 forwards and the rover would go down the ice and pass the puck back and forth laterally. In 1899, the Montreal Shamrocks win the cup, and they played what they called scientific hockey, which you or I would just call strategic hockey.
Sure.
But scientific was a big buzzword at the time. In the business world, everything was, scientific. So they called it scientific hockey, and it was basically just more emphasis on combination plays, passing.
Sure.
And more positional playing as a unit. So the game it really developed quickly in terms of skill and players' ability. It started off as a bunch of rich guys would play occasionally, and then it became something that people aspired to do, and the fans expected them to train and to practice and to play games, so that was one of the problems for the Dawson team, is they hadn't realized how much the game had changed. Weldy Young had left in 1899. Well, between 1899 and 1905, the game had changed so much and got so much better. And what they found was, and also the rounded corners came in, and they were using, and boards came in, and they were using the boards for passing plays,
right,
and not. And so the Dawson players were like, we don't know what's going on here.
It's funny because you talked about that in the book too, about how in the beginning, hockey was more or less like an elitist sport, because you had to have money to be in these athletic clubs, so to speak. Yeah. And that's where it was all born out of. But as the game grew and grew, and especially with Lord Stanley donating the cup, that really started, the interest in the sport to, go through every part of society, which, again, much like in the States with baseball, it just explodes right across the entire scene. So the Dawson City team makes it all the way back. They played the games all the way back to Dawson City. What happened to them afterwards?
Well, not all of them went back. First of all, only 5 of them went back. Weldy Young, one of the ones who stayed. One of them stayed a couple of them stayed in the Yukon the rest of their lives. The young goalie went back for a while, and then he went to BC, and none of them. Some of them distinguished themselves in Yukon history, I guess. But this was probably the highlight of their life, I bet. For most of them. Weldy Young actually went on to be a really successful mining executive. Right now, I'm writing a book about a 1964 mining scandal, and looking at sort of the roots of Canadian mining. And Weldy Young was like in 1910-11, he makes some really good mining deals. Like he buys some claims for like $125 and sells them for $300,000. And He ends up being a mining executive in Toronto until his death in 1940s.
Well, he certainly did very well for himself, that's for sure. But basically the hockey scene in Dawson, that was kind of the peak of everything. It sort of declined after that.
Yeah, I mean, they're still a league. I know people in Dawson who still play.
I meant as far as challenging for the Stanley Cup. There were no further challenges.
No, they talked big about how they were going to, challenge again, and they would come back. They'd be better prepared and whatnot. But no, I mean, it was a very expensive trip.
Sure.
And it just they also got blown out so badly. I don't think. The thing is, when they were coming and they were unknown, the rinks could sell lots of tickets. It was in Ottawa. It was, the rink was full and there was lots of excitement. But they came back. It wasn't going to be quite the same.
Right. Wow. But like I said, just the sheer volume of what they had to go through to get there is, for us, it's easy to imagine now because with the advent of air travel, you can be pretty much anywhere you want to be on the North American continent within hours, if you think about it. But what they had to go through, I mean, you're talking 3 weeks of grueling travel, too. It's not like they were living the lap of luxury or anything like that on the way.
Walk 330 miles.
And 20 below zero weather. No thanks.
Not me.
But, it's incredible.
It's really I mean, even if the weather had been good, they were traveling 40 miles a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is,
that's a pace.
Gear. No, they didn't. They only took their skates, and they got new gear in Ottawa. But they, some clothes and some food and some skates. So they had to carry that on their back. 40K a day is a good hike. And then the weather.
Yeah, no kidding. And you said they did it without dog sleds, which is, a primary form of travel when you have to, when there's a lot to be transported. But
well, and the thing is, they could have taken a carriage, a horse-drawn buggy or a sleigh. There were regular things, and they would have taken about 5 days. It kind of depended on the weather and whatnot. It could be 3 days to 10 days at the most. But it was going to cost $125 a guy. So that would have added $1,000 to the cost of the trip. And so even months before the trip, Weldy Young was saying, well, we're, writing letters saying we're going to walk. It'll keep us fit. And then as it turned out, there wasn't enough snow for dog sleds anyway. It had been kind of a mild winter. I mean, mild by Yukon standards.
Yeah.
And there hadn't been a lot of snow, so no dog sleds.
Yeah, for us, when we're down here going, oh my God, it's freezing. They're going, man, is it hot out here? Oh my God, what's going on? And when you said $125 a day, I mean, if you think about it, that's 1905 money
for the whole trip.
Man.
Or for the trip, I mean, but that's 1905 money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's today that's all,
$2 billion.
I'll tell you, it's got to be in the thousands.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, if you really stop and think about that for a second. Yep. But speaking of modern times, they did recreate this trip, didn't they?
Yeah, about 25 years ago, a bunch of hockey players from Dawson recreated it, and they played the Ottawa alumni and in Ottawa. And some of them took dog sleds, some of them took snowmobiles, some of them I think took a bus. And
they didn't recreate it then.
There was no walking, was there?
Yeah.
No, I don't think any. Well, there is a movie about it, so maybe somebody walked. But I think if everyone's taking snowmobiles and dog sleds, if you walked, you might be behind the others. I don't know.
Yeah, anyway, I would imagine.
They recreated it to the extent that they could, and they had, from what I gather, they had a lot of fun.
And let's see, Ottawa won those games too, didn't they?
I believe so. Yeah,
I think so. Yeah, but
it may have only been one game, but yeah.
But still, what an incredible story. And like I said, your book does such a fantastic job of creating the backstory for it, because that was one of the things that when I read it, it was, I'm like, oh, I thought it was going to open right up to the dot. No, it painted the entire picture, which makes it that much more enjoyable because you're so much more knowledgeable about what built up to it, rather than just having it tossed right at you. Here it is. No, you know the backstory, and it's fascinating. It's a fascinating look at the early days of hockey and just how different things were is absolutely incredible. And, it was like 120 years ago, which doesn't seem like that long ago in the grand scheme of things, I guess. But
not at your age.
No, especially me. Yeah, exactly. You're right. But Tim, you got any other projects in the hopper?
Yeah, well, so it's not about hockey, but it's about.
Well, we don't want to know.
Mining scandal in 1964. That was a big story here in Canada, so I'm writing about that.
Excellent. And
maybe someday I'll go do another hockey story, but I can't find anything quite as good as the Dawson team. That was quite a story.
No, it is. It's absolutely incredible. And like I said, I know you can. Like I bought mine at Barnes and Noble. I know you can get it on Amazon. Anywhere else you want to point out where you can get the book?
I think in the States, those are probably the two best places. In Canada, any bookstore will have it, but I think in the States, Amazon or Barnes and Noble are probably the best too. I mean, unless you have a bookstore that's really good for sports books or something.
There you go. Right, that's the best kind of bookstore right there, as far as I'm concerned. Oh boy, well, Tim, this has been fantastic, and I appreciate you taking. I mean, we're almost at an hour already, and I'll tell you, I could have kept going for another hour, but this has been fantastic and such a fascinating story, and I just appreciate you so much coming on and telling us about it.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I had a lot of fun. Thanks.
Absolutely. And anything else you want to add before we go?
Well, you never asked me what my favorite team is.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I know it's not Toronto because you said that in the beginning. So,
Boston.
Really? The Bruins, huh?
Really?
Now, you're from Toronto, correct?
Yeah.
So how'd you become a Bruins fan?
When I was a little kid, like 6 years old, signed up. My parents signed me up for the local community league, and all the teams were named after NHL teams. Mm-hmm. In fact, there was a team called the Montreal Maroons, which shows you how old the league was. And I got put on the Boston Bruins, and I was really bummed out because my best friend was put on the New York Rangers. And so to cheer me up, my parents would say, oh, there's a real Boston team in the paper. And of course, in those days, this was in the mid 60s, Boston was in last place every year. But they were talking about this young guy named Bobby Orr who was coming along. And so I weathered a couple of bad years and then enjoyed the good Orr Esposito years, and right up to the good Patrice Bergeron and Brad Marchand era.
Wow, certainly Bobby Orr, without a doubt, changed the game forever. And I bet you're glad to see. It looks like Bergeron's coming back for one more season, huh?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, he hasn't signed the contract yet.
Yeah, I think he will. I think he wants one more shot at it. I think.
Yeah, I mean, like he won the Celtics, so his game hasn't deteriorated too much. But I hope Boston can avoid the kind of teardown the Blackhawks are doing.
Oof, boy.
And with McAvoy and Pasternak, they've got some good young talent, so maybe they can avoid that. But when Bergeron goes, it's going to hurt. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, it's great to see him performing at the level he is, in this advanced stage of his career, because some players can't do it for that long, and Patrice certainly has. It's just been incredible to watch. And you're right, this Chicago teardown's been kind of tough to watch.
Yeah. Well, Taves is now kind of going, I don't know if I'm up for this.
Yeah, he's like, you know what? I think I've had enough. That's quite it. But he's got 3 Stanley Cup rings, so I guess he can't complain too much.
Yeah. No, he's had a good career, but
yeah. Well, and unfortunately, this is the way it is in the salary cap era now too, where you hit your peak, but then all of a sudden you find yourself butted right up against that cap because, well, obviously all your players got you what you wanted, got you a good playoff run, and then they want to get paid, and so it goes. But it's going to be, I'll tell you, it's going to be, I can't wait for hockey to start. My wife always goes crazy because she's like, "You're wishing the summer away." I go, "Yeah, I am. Actually, I am." So what? Oh, boy. But, yeah, like I said, Tim, thank you so much for coming on. This has been so much fun. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. And, stay in touch, and you're more than welcome to come back on the show anytime you want.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All righty. That was Tim Falconer. What a story. This has just been excellent. Well, that's all the time we've got for this week. So for Dave the Save Warner, I'm Scott Kimball. We're signing off. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Marty'sLegalStick.com, and, of course, on the Sports History Network. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week on Marty's Illegal Stick, a hockey history podcast.
At the Sports History Network, we're all about sports yesteryear, and so we're so pleased to introduce you to Row One, an online memorabilia gallery and shop that brings your sports history to life anywhere. The Row One gallery includes over 5,200 gorgeously reproduced prints of team posters, game program covers, game tickets, advertisements, and more in baseball, pro and college football, pro and college basketball, and more. And any gallery item may be printed in a variety of sizes on wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. And in Row One shop, check out the thousands more of unique items with the retro and historical designs dating back to 1876, including t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, phone cases, mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com, ROW1, for access to the full Row One catalog and for gallery prints and gift items, plus get a 15% discount off all prints on the Row One Pictorium Gallery with coupon code SHN15. Follow the link on the show notes.